also the director of the JSW International Squash Circuit and part of the global operations team at Dalberg Advisors. And yes, so we're very interested in seeing how this conversation goes. And so before we formally begin, I think I'll just say a few words about and what basically this conversation would be about, so that the people who have joined us have a clear understanding of it. So Hindu College Gazette, of course, it's a magazine that is run by the Symposium Society at Hindu College, but our coverage extends sort of beyond that, and we cover things like policy, politics, economy, society, culture, etc. And it's a bi-monthly digital magazine as of now. We started in October, and yeah, that's where we are right now. And in this session, we'll be talking about a host of things, including Liesl's own personal experience and her experience with journalism in a team which does some pretty interesting work at TheSwaddle. And we will discuss all of those things. We'll discuss about the general media landscape and her thoughts about India and US in that regard. And then also some things about how HCG could work and what are some lessons that we could take as a student publication. So Liesl, I think let's just start with introduction from your side. Just tell us about your experiences, what made you enter journalism. Just tell us anything about yourself, and yeah.
Okay, well, first, thank you so much for having me. This is a really big honor. I'm well aware of Hindu College's storied history and the Gazettes as well. So I feel lucky to be here. Well, as you read off my bio is a bit checkered. I took a break from journalism for a bit, but I was drawn to journalism. I graduated with a BA in journalism, and I think I was drawn to it because I like a good story. And I like finding out the whys behind things, not just what, but why. So that's why I was drawn to it. Then after graduation, I worked for a bit in the US for a print daily. And then I moved to India. And for a variety of reasons, journalism wasn't an option at the time. So I worked for a development consultancy or management consultancy organization that focuses on development issues, and worked in their operations team. And then I went on to work for the India's first international squash circuit. And then I found my way back to journalism via TheSwaddle. But I learned a lot in those two jobs, even if it wasn't what I was wanting to do, like, at the end of the day, because I did want to return to journalism. I learned a lot there, and it's definitely informed my work at TheSwaddle and elsewhere. And that's how I got to where I am today.
Right. So was journalism something that you wanted to pursue since, childhood or high school or something?
No, not childhood. And first of all, thank you for humoring me with this Q&A format. I can't imagine just like sitting here and spouting off for like an hour and a half. No, it wasn't something I wanted to do in childhood. I sort of found my way to it in college. I worked for my college newspaper. We came out twice weekly. And I found I really enjoyed it. And I have always loved writing in general. So I actually graduated with a degree in writing, which included nonfiction writing, creative writing, and journalism. And I think all of that kind of like spoke to my love of a good story, and also helped make me just a better journalist in general, because it gave me a feel for a variety of formats. But no, it wasn't. I think when I was in childhood, I wanted to be, I don't know, probably like a ballerina or something.
Yeah, no, I get it. And so you also came to India. Your career has largely been based out of India, right? Apart from your, so was that a conscious decision? Did you want to work in India for some reason, or what was the sort of motivation behind that?
Well, I'll tell you, I did want to work outside of the US. I wanted to work and live outside of the US for at least a few years, and that's obviously turned into a little more than a few years. I moved here in 2010. But no, it wasn't a conscious decision to move here for work. I moved here for love. My boyfriend at the time and now husband is Indian, and he was returning to India, and I went along with him.
That's wholesome, as we say. Just before we move on, one thing that I missed was participants, please have your mics off, and you can turn on your video. And if you have any questions, please just type it in the chat box. We'll get to the audience questions at the end. So, yeah. So moving on. So you have experience with print and digital both, right? And
Yes.
TheSwaddle, of course, being primarily digital. Do you see any sort of how has that experience been for you, shifting from print to journalism to digital? And from there, I think we can discuss, more about just the media landscape.
Yeah. Digital is it's a lot faster pace. And there's nothing that really stands in your way from getting things done. I mean, you can write an article and it publishes immediately if you want, or you could, with print, it comes out at a certain time, right? Like you have deadlines that you abide by, but there's just a lot more freedom with digital. There's also a lot more variety of formats in digital, not just within editorial, but also, you have the opportunity for podcasts, you have the opportunity for videos, you have an opportunity for multimedia. So there's a lot more, it's just, I find it a lot more creative than print, which isn't to say print doesn't have its place. It does, absolutely. TV came out and everyone was like, oh my God, print is over. Then the internet came out and everyone's like, oh my God, print is over. I don't think print will ever be over. I think that the difference in pace and the difference in, the fact that digital media is such sort of like a wild west where like anything is possible, where print there's a lot more of a formality to it and a process to it, I think, that lends itself to focus, that and institutional, how do I say it? Institutional depth, for lack of a better word, that does a lot to inform a broader range of focus, reach broader people, and provide sort of like a more like institutional context to the news that you're getting. But that said, digital is where the growth is. Digital is the future, and a lot of that is because there's so much scope and possibility for what you can do with it.
Right. That's actually a very interesting point, because I wanted to sort of segue into this whole conversation between digital and legacy media. And I mean, in India also, we have seen the rise of very prominent independent media organizations, primarily digital, and doing a very good job in that sense. But legacy media also still seems to have a position which is and quite a wide viewership. How do you see that? And traditional TV channels, newspapers, etc. Do you think people still rely on that primarily, or do you think digital media has sort of created a space of authenticity, legitimacy for itself?
Yes, both. Because the thing is, like, yes, I think digital media has at this point, digital media in India is what, like 10, 15 years old? 15 years old, let's say. It's not much older than that. When you think about the history of media, that's not much. I think in that sense, yes, it has carved out legitimacy for itself. There are a lot of niche in our, in our correspondence before this, Pratik, you talked about, you mentioned niche media. Yeah. There are a lot of niche media houses that have done a lot of respectable work, incredible work. And I think in that sense have carved out space and respect within the broader Indian media ecosystem. That said, internet penetration in India is what? I can't remember the stats exactly off the top of my head, but it's not much compared to what it could be. So digital media in India right now is really limited by the reach of the internet. And when you're talking about penetration of internet, also you have to think about things like whether or not your media site is optimized for mobile viewing. because a lot of people are also, the people who do have internet in India often access it through their mobile. So if your site is not optimized for mobile viewing, then you're still not actually really reaching potential readers. So it's as much, sorry, I strayed off topic. It's as much technical as it is editorial. In that sense, I think legacy media, print media, these big media houses, they not only have the sort of institutional history and respect and clout, they're just a lot more accessible for people. And I think also what you see, it's gradually changing, but I think a lot of the digital media in India that has sprouted up has been English language. And that also limits its reach, right? Like significantly on top of internet access. So in that way, there are a lot of legacy media houses in regional languages that are, you know, not just surviving, but thriving, and probably will for some time, simply because the digital media isn't accessible to readers.
Yeah. So in fact, I think there are so many threads here, and I want to jump at all of them because I had all these questions in mind. But I think we'll try to keep it. Yeah, we'll try to go one by one. So, because you've been in India for around, I think 10 to 11 years now, and how has your perspective been with regards to big TV channels and newspapers? Do you see shift in coverage? Because I mean, speaking at least personally, I haven't at least observed media for the last 10 years, but probably for the last 5 years or so, and I do see that there have been, of course, changes in terms of a lot more polarization and political, direct leanings being much more visible in terms of, and instead of proper news that you can gather. So do you see that happening? Do you see that change happening in coverage, in terms of reportage, in terms of how TV debates are organized in TV channels, etc.?
I do, absolutely. And it's not just in India. I think in the US, that's true for the US as well. And I would venture to guess that's true for a lot of other places. I think that has a lot to do with the political climate that we live in, not just in India, but around the world. There have been clampdowns on press freedom. There have been polarization in the political sphere, which trickles over into media as well. So yes, I have seen that change. It has become much more polarized. I think it's, do you want to lead this conversation into objectivity? Is that where you're going with this? I know you wanted to touch on that at some point. I can mention it now because I think that is related to what you're asking me. There is a lot more polarization. A lot of, even especially the big and small media houses are taking hard ideological stances. And I also think that the internet has changed things for traditional broadcast and print media as well, because the internet has made things immediately available, and so and suddenly there's competition in terms of where you can go for information. So I think what's happened, again, not just in India, but in general, is that media houses have really struggled to stay afloat and have been losing readers. And this has probably been going on for, I would say, at least 20 years now. And in doing so, in order to maximize their appeal, they've started appealing to the lowest common denominator. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of intelligence. I mean that in terms of actual discourse. So yeah, there are some TV news shows and debates that I just can't watch because it's just people yelling at each other and it's not actually a conversation. And that's, again, not just in India, but it's true of American news as well, some channels. So yes, I have seen that polarization change, but I think it's more than 5 years. It's more than 10 years. I think we've been heading here for at least 2 decades, and I think it reflects also the sort of political trend that has happened at the same time. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I would in fact ask you to go into a little more detail about these differences from what you've experienced between the Indian media scene and US. And say, for example, and this is something that we communicated earlier also. For instance, something like New York Times having a history of endorsing a candidate in the presidential elections, and I think last elections they endorsed both Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar in the primaries. Now that's not something really that happens in India. These straightforward endorsements. Does that kind of affect the kind of coverage that a newspaper is doing in the US, or do you think it's more like just an editorial call and does not really influence much about their reportage or their opinion?
At the New York Times, I know that there is a hard and fast wall between their opinion section and their editorial and news division. So I don't think it's necessarily endorsing a certain candidate or a certain political party. I don't think it necessarily influences directly the reporting. That said, I think publications, even historically, publications that strive for objectivity, I think, New York Times is a more left-leaning newspaper. Wall Street Journal is a more right-leaning newspaper. The Indian Express is more left-leaning. Times of India is more right-leaning. So I mean, you're going to find that anywhere. I think the endorsements like that. I think with there is this value within journalism of objectivity, right? At least, old school journalism. But I think that's always been sort of disingenuous because any reporting you do, any op-ed you write, you're always making a choice about what to include and what not to include. So, I think endorsements of political candidates are fine. I think where you run into trouble is when your sort of endorsement or lean is not issue based, but just across the board, right? I think a lot of sort of we'll use the New York Times as an example. I think it or at least tries hard to be issue based in its sort of ideological leaning. I think once you just start identifying as a left, and self-identifying as, I'm going to be the voice of the left, I'm going to be voice of the right as a media house, that's when you become propaganda. So, and I think that if you look at the history of the New York Times, it's not like it's not always endorsed a leftist political candidate. So I think if it comes down to honesty with yourself and your readers, and it comes down to considering each issue, and not just simply identifying with one ideology or another across the board.
Right. And do you think so? And this is kind of an assessment that I sort of have, and you can just correct me if you think this is right or wrong. So, for instance, in India, I don't think, even if people have sort of a recognition of some channels leaning in a certain direction and some newspapers leaning in a certain direction, I think the consumption of news, in a sense, that happens is still to see that source as your primary source for probably a large section of people. And I don't at least know many who would say that, okay, this is my source from left-leaning news, now I'll get my source from right-leaning news and then try to make an objective judgment about it or something like that. How do consumers, or how do readers, watchers, viewers perceive that kind of a bias in the US media landscape? So, for instance, is there a clear recognition of this fact that one newspaper will give you one kind of a news and that's what I'm consuming? Or does that seem like the reality, the true version in what people consume?
I think there's probably a lot more mainstream conversation about it in the US than there is necessarily here. But I don't think that it necessarily leads people to change their reading habits. And what you're essentially talking about is digital literacy. The idea that I mean, it says digital, but it's not necessarily, I mean, it applies offline as well. But to know the sort of the ability to, again, that sort of like free-for-all characteristic of digital media and the internet also allows a proliferation of misinformation, propaganda, and outright lies. So I think I think that's a problem everywhere. I think it's especially a problem here from, you know, WhatsApp forwards to, you know, being able to identify like a false WhatsApp forward to picking and choosing your media. And I don't necessarily have an answer for it myself. I think digital literacy needs to be part of school curricula everywhere in the world now. I think there needs to be a lot more emphasis placed on critical thinking skills in education to prepare people to know that they sort of have to think for themselves. But, you know, thinking for yourself is kind of hard.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. It takes work. I'll be perfectly honest. It's not like I really go seeking out coverage from a lot of media that I like am politically differ from. I do try to, you know, get a diverse like source list, but it's, you know, people are set in their ways, including me.
Yeah, no, I think all of us might, you know, relate to that on some level. Although, I mean, I think there are some apps, some websites, I can't really recall names right now, but who have tried to use this model of presenting one particular event from different perspectives. So, you know, they show that the left is covering it this way, the right, center, whatever, and then you can do that. Do you have any, I mean, takes on that? Is it sort of taking ground? Does it have promise?
I think it has promise. I don't know. I say that, but I don't really use one. So maybe I don't think it has as much promise as I would like to believe. I think sites like that are important. I think it's difficult though, man. You know, the thing about the internet and digital media is that a lot of readers consume their digital news via social media. So you're crammed in amongst all the other videos and photos and, you know, updates from friends. And so people also don't want to actually do the work so let's say that you have like a snapshot of 3 different takes on the reporting on an issue. That requires people to read the same thing 3 times. I think it's a great idea. I don't know how to make it take off because I think that's part of the problem is that people don't want to do that work. They don't want to read the same thing 3 times, particularly when they're on social media. You've got like maybe half a second to grab their attention and make them actually stop. And then at that point, still their attention span is really short.
Yeah. I mean, even I think with fake news also, and the point that you were talking about, digital literacy, that also sort of comes into the picture. And again, do you see differences in the ways that fake news is sort of propagated in US and India? Are there different kinds of social media platforms that are dominant in each of these countries, and just sort of impact that they have or ways of regulating them? Anything?
Regulation, I'm not so sure about. Regulation is probably stricter here. The US has very liberal freedom of speech laws. Differences, I think what probably differs most is like venue that fake news is disseminated through. You know, WhatsApp is really big in India. It's not that big in the US. So that would probably differ. Fake news, I mean, the thing about fake news also is that it's always true to someone, and someone believes that. There's a lot of propaganda that I would consider fake news, and other people are like, no, it's just, you're too liberal, and what you're saying is fake news, right? So it's kind of, fake news to a certain extent is in the eye of the beholder, and that gets back to doing the work. I think there probably is a bit more digital literacy in the U.S. Because there's really been efforts, I think, in probably the past, like at least 10 to 15 years of introducing that into school curricula. And I do have hope for the future for you guys and younger. I think that that generation is coming of age with a lot more awareness of these issues, with a lot more willingness to do the work, and seeking out a variety of perspectives. So that is what gives me hope. And hopefully you will use those like multi-perspective apps more than I do.
I mean, I don't right now, but hopefully. So that's also, so we have been talking about this objectivity business. I think let's try to break that down. And I get the exact idea that you're sort of talking about. There is, I think, also some sort of a romanticization of journalism that happens, and some would say just treat it like any other business, and then you would be able to see the flaws in it and then perhaps overcome it, etc. And of course, even in the kinds of questions that someone chooses, you can see their, leaning, supporting, whatever. But how do you personally see that the idea of objectivity has evolved in journalistic circles, in media circles? And what do you think can be a good standard that, maybe you personally aspire to, that TheSwaddle aspires to, or anything, or anyone who wants to do good journalism? What can be objectivity today?
That's a good question. Let me think. So I have seen objectivity evolve. I think, when I was younger, up till the beginning of college, objectivity, was this hard and fast rule that you present both sides and you keep your own emotions out of it. And I think I don't know whether it was just me being at college and being exposed to more ideas and conversations, or whether it was, but I also think it coincided with a larger shift in media globally. And the start of the recognition that marginalized voices deserve to be heard as well. And a more acceptance of marginalized voices in the mainstream. I think the result was that the recognition means that objectivity doesn't necessarily just mean having someone from the other side saying something. There are some viewpoints that really just aren't worth featuring. I mean, for instance, like, is it really worth going and, just for the sake of having a counterpoint, going and interviewing a hardline Hindutva supremacist who, thinks all Muslims should be expelled from the country? Like, frankly, no, I don't think that's a valid viewpoint. And if you do that, what are you accomplishing? Are you really accomplishing objectivity? Are you really accomplishing presenting the reader with a, valuable alternative, or are you just giving that person a platform for their hate? So I think that started to shift about 10 to 15 years ago. And I think a large part was due to a lot of people from marginalized communities really fighting to be heard and pointing these things out and slowly starting to be listened to. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of listening to people from those communities, and including their voices, but it has, I think, slowly changed what journalism recognizes as objectivity. In terms of how to, what was the second question? How journalists can?
Yeah, basically, I mean, what do you understand objectivity today, and what is something that people could, keep in mind?
I think objectivity today is transparency and honesty. I think And for me, at least, it's critical thinking. A lot of people, look at journalism and they're like, oh, you write for a living. And honestly, I prefer to think that I think for a living, because you really have to think critically, not just in terms of, structuring what you're presenting and in terms of how you communicate it, but also in terms of what you do, like what you're putting out there, and what the issue is and what deserves to be featured. So I think that thinking is the first part of objectivity today. Like what deserves to be in this story. If I'm committed to presenting a sort of holistic view of a story, what deserves to be in it? And hand in hand, what doesn't deserve to be in it? And then I think being transparent with your readers, I think publications and media houses have a duty to be transparent in those terms. And I also think journalists today, more than ever before, have an opportunity to be transparent about it, right? Like journalists have their own many platforms, in the sense that, you can communicate directly with readers. You have social media. And I think, if there's something that you've covered, that you're taking a lot of flack for, there is a way to sort of defend your choices and communicate your choices and be transparent about it. Obviously, you probably have to do that in consultation with your employer. But there is a way. I mean, it comes down to transparency and making sure that the reader understands the choices that you make.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think even objectivity sort of can be used in many ways as a kind of a way to give voice to people who, like you said, probably should not be given that voice. And, with websites like Op India and stuff claiming to be an objective other side of liberal media, that kind of has its own problems. But anyway, so even on the point of transparency, I think so many other factors would also, influence and affect in terms of how transparency goes about. So, for example, things like government pressure, corporate pressure, advertising influence, or self-censorship also. Do you also see a change, similarities, differences in India, US from your own experience? Is there something more of, some aspect in one country and less in the other, anything like that?
God, I don't know if I could speak to that, but I do. I mean, I think it gets back to sort of like shooting for the lowest common denominator now that there's a lot more competition. And I think I also think what has happened, as all of those influences have been at play, is that often you'll probably find some really good reporting, but it will have a terrible headline. It will be clickbaity. And these are conversations that we even have in TheSwaddle. Like, is this headline too clickbaity? Or this headline is really boring. How can we make it more interesting? Like, because the whole goal is to get your news to readers. So, you have to have these conversations. Now, where you run into concerns is when you, when you have money talking, for lack of a better term. It is a concern. It's especially a concern for digital media. Digital media, I think only the New York Times has figured out a successful revenue model for their website. It is tough. And there are a lot of funders who come in wanting to tell you what to publish, how to report it. There are a lot of funders who come in, and by funders I mean both like startup funders as well as like advertisers. There are a lot of funders who come in who, in the pursuit of readers and eyeballs and clicks, will make you do the clickbaity headlines or even the clickbaity articles, and you have to because they hold the purse strings. So it's tough, especially for like startup digital media, and I don't think anybody really has the answer to that.
Right. So in fact, even digital media in India, so I do see a lot more, kind of at least pushing subscription-based models across the board. And some platforms like News Laundry, they don't really accept ads, so kind of almost a fully subscriber-based model. Do you think there's enough awareness about the merits of a subscriber-based model, or even though has this sort of idea that you should be paying for good quality news? Does that idea, has that found root among sections? Yeah.
I think it has probably more accepted, and not to make myself sound so old, but like among people your guys' age and younger. I think for people my age and older, I think because the internet, again, originated as this free-for-all, this place where you could access anything at any time, for free. Then when publications started imposing paywalls, it didn't work because that sort of expectation had already been so ingrained. And I think younger generations have a lot more appreciation for funding good journalism, or at least journalism that they like. And so I think that will be more acceptable to upcoming readers. The only problem is subscription models don't pay all of the bills. So you have to, most digital media sites end up having a hybrid, like a hybrid revenue stream. It might involve subscription, it might involve donations, it might involve one thing we're exploring at TheSwaddle is funded content, where maybe an organization wants to sponsor an article about women's reproductive health. So you agree on a topic, but that's where it ends. And then the reporter goes and does their thing. They choose the angle, they do the reporting, and there's no crossover, right? So that article doesn't go back to the funder for review and approval. You've signed off on it, and you get what you get. So so stuff like that, traditional advertisings or website ads, but even that, honestly, that doesn't bring in. It's like subscriptions. It all brings in a little bit, but nothing brings in enough. So that's why a lot of people end up with hybrid models. And then you also have some just sponsored content where it's essentially like an advertisement for the advertiser that is kind of created by the publication. So, I mean, again, there have been a lot, and also you have, what's another model? There's a model where, for example, the New York Times has a sort of curated shop, essentially. And if you shop from that site, and it's curated, right? So it's all very brainy and intellectual and high class, and it fits very much within their brand. And if you buy those products through their site, then they'll get some kickback from the click-through to purchase the product. So some publications have been experimenting with that as well, but it's mostly a hybrid, and I have forgotten the original question, so I'm just going to stop there.
No, I think you answered it. Yeah, okay. Basically, I was just asking. Yeah, if this idea has sort of taken root, I think that's quite insightful. You also, Swaddle, I think, so we can sort of move there, but also before we exactly do so, there have been a rise of some good, I don't think a lot, but at least some very good women-centric, women-led publications. So Swaddle is, of course, one example. You also have Feminism in India, all of them publishing these articles, so, and doing their work. How do you see some challenges that these publications might be facing? Because it's sort of a niche content, and then it's also something which is at the same time quite important to bring into the mainstream. And any challenges that they might face in a traditional media landscape in terms of backlash or anything?
Are you just talking about women's media in general, or feminist media, or sorry,
Yeah,
I'm just
so
trying
no,
to clarify.
right. So not Swaddle specifically, but any publication that sort of takes women-centric issues as their main focus. And then Swaddle, of course, also covers health and science, etc. But there has been sort of a rise of feminist media focusing much more on these issues. So do you think it's easy to find that space in a traditional media landscape for a publication like that, and what the challenges in that could be?
Well, first, I wouldn't necessarily call women's media niche, because literally half the population in the world
Yeah.
are women. So there's nothing niche about that. But I get what you're saying. It, I think that, like, again, in our correspondence before this, you asked me if calling TheSwaddle a feminist publication would be fair. It would not only be fair, we proudly call ourselves a feminist publication. The obstacle there, of course, is alienating potential readers who the word feminist and the ideology around it is very misunderstood. And so when you use that term, you do alienate potential readers. But I think part of our mission, and I would suspect part of Feminism in India's mission and other publications that focus on promoting gender equality, is to sort of break down the negative associations and stereotypes associated with that, and to challenge that feminism is only benefits women. It doesn't. It's about gender equality for men, women, non-binary folk, and in that way it benefits everyone. So yes, I think there is a challenge in that sense, but I also think that's the challenge that we have committed to. That's sort of part of why we originated, is to take that challenge on.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, just to clarify, niche in the sense that I don't really see big media covering it that much. Yeah, but
I get it.
Yeah. So let's also talk about the basic idea behind Swaddle. So you've been associated with it for, I mean, a long time, and just what is the idea of Swaddle in that sense, and what has sort of been your experience leading a team like that? Because it also sort of moved from just a women's health resources platform to covering also science, health, etc., etc. And so, how does that?
I'm amazed that you know that. How many people read TheSwaddle like 6 years ago?
I mean, I didn't, to be very honest.
No one. Of course
Yeah.
not. No, because it wasn't aimed at you. You weren't the audience. Even if 6 years ago you were the age you are now, you still weren't the audience. And this gets into a little bit about what's cool about digital media. We started out aimed at I would say women aged 25 to 40, but specifically women who had children or who wanted to have children. And it was meant to be a resource on women's health, pregnancy and reproductive health, and child development and parenting. That's where it originated, because our founder really saw that as a gap in not just in media, but just in general knowledge and reliable resources. And she's not wrong, it is. But as we evolved, there was always a sense that TheSwaddle could be more. And then what we realized that actually, as we did start experimenting with, culture coverage and like science coverage and a broader spectrum of health coverage, what we started realizing was our readership was actually younger than we had thought it would be. And so that sort of led us to reconsider what TheSwaddle could be. And as it turns out, like, most of our readers, at least at this point, don't necessarily have kids or are interested in parenting. So, starting a digital media company is really sort of about adaptation, figuring out what works. And I don't see that as necessarily being untrue to the vision, so much as having an evolving vision, like knowing what your values are and evolving to always be true to those values. And I think one of the values that, one of the values I know at the beginning for our founder was always to start conversations about gender equality. And at first it was within the family, that was the focus. And then it became clear that we could do more. We could talk about that outside of the family. And then it became clear that our readers, if we only focused on, family issues, that might leave out a lot of our readers. So we broadened the scope to focus on issues that would affect readers outside the family, issues that would affect younger readers. So yeah, that's what's cool about digital media, is that you can sort of pivot. You can stay true to your values, but you can sort of pivot, and you end up surprisingly becoming something more.
Right. Yes, sorry. So also take us through the kind of editorial and the creative process that happens at TheSwaddle, because I think when we were also discussing it among our team, how to sort of prepare for this interaction, I think what was interesting to many of our team members was the kind of very creative content that TheSwaddle covers, or at least in ways which are quite unique, and creating those videos, and in terms of just the presentation of it and the coverage of very important and sort of lesser known issues. And that's, like you said, that was sort of the vision behind it. Take us also through the creative process of how that happens, from brainstorming ideas and maybe a pitch meeting or anything like that, till the publication process. How do you go about selecting those topics, deciding how to go about it, presenting it, all of that?
Okay. Well, another sort of founding principle of TheSwaddle was to start talking about things that aren't talked about. Again, in regards to like family dynamics, which then like broadened into a much larger scope, to talk about the taboo and bring it into mainstream discussion. Excuse me. So I think that allows for a lot of creativity. There's not necessarily, there's not a lot of limits on what we cover. What I think we've done is we've done a really good idea, or a really good job of the whole team sort of imbibing the TheSwaddle brand. And I mean, that's, is directly due to our founder, Carla Buchman, that if you have a strong sense for like the brand and the value, the brand is the values, at least for us. If you have a strong sense for those values, then you know what would fit to cover. So in terms of how we brainstorm, we have daily morning meetings for the editorial team, where we're all expected to sort of come having read the news, having gone through social media, know what people are talking about, know what's been breaking overnight. And we have that morning conversation, and everyone normally comes with, like, I would say 3-4 ideas, and we kind of narrow that down to each one taking on 1 to 2 pieces for the day. And the conversation is sort of like about why would we cover this? A big question that we always ask is, okay, but what is this so what? Like, why does this matter? And if we can't really answer that, and we also, then we don't really, then that's sort of like a box to check that, no, that's not necessarily for us. And we, like you said, we are a smaller publication. We're not necessarily one of the big dailies that just does straight news reporting. So another question we ask is, can we add to the conversation? If there's an event that has just been everywhere, all over the place, and all we would be doing is sort of like adding the same facts, just regurgitating them, then, or if the only thing we have to say is something that, like, several other publications have already put out there, then maybe this is something that we don't weigh in on, because it's not so much that we don't necessarily have thoughts on it. It's just so much that, like, we don't need to add to the clutter. Like, so that's part of it as well. We also look for fresh, like, obviously, newsy interesting news, and we and a good barometer is like when we ourselves click on it to read it. So that is sort of the editorial meeting. Then we have a full team meeting where we also, like all of the different teams, so we have an editorial team, graphics team, AV team, partnership team, and there's a lot of collaboration and communication between those teams. And I think for me, that's what makes it cool. Like instead of just like sitting and writing, like you could also be working on a social media project with someone from the social media team as a journalist, or you could be working on a podcast with someone from our audiovisual team. So that full team meeting is sort of like where we give updates on what we're doing, and also like do a lot of coordination because there is so much cross-team collaboration. And then we go and we cover what we're supposed to cover, and that takes us up to more pretty much the middle of the day. And the afternoons are devoted to longer-term projects, whether that's a reporting project, that's a social media campaign project. It could be a lot of different things. And those projects are the really exciting projects because those are typically the ones where they're sort of passion projects. One of the things I love is that like our editor, Carla, she basically wants you to write about what you want to write about. There's no like assignments per se. You're expected to come up with your own ideas, think them through, and pitch them and be ready to take off on them. And sometimes they work out, other times they don't. Sometimes they work out with a little refinement. But that kind of like scope for creativity and sort of the freedom to sort of like take it on, I think fosters a lot of ownership and it makes me excited to complete those projects.
Right. So also, again, in the same vein about this whole creative process. So for example, in many of the TheSwaddle videos, we see there are a lot of clips from different movies or advertisements or songs, etc. And that kind of, I mean, at least as a viewer, it sort of puts things into perspective. I want to know from the point of view of the creator of those videos and the people behind that, is that a conscious cultural commentary that you want to do in terms of analyzing how these stereotypes are propagated in cultural things that people might take for granted, or is it like more like I don't know how to exactly frame it that way, but that thought process behind using a lot of these clips from different movies and different very common pop culture references, and then to analyze them and to break them down.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I cannot take credit for any of our video content. That is our amazing video team, Trishti, Neha, Anhita, our graphics department, like all working together. I've like maybe helped out on a few scripts, but like that is them and they're amazing. But I would say it's definitely purposeful. Everything we put out there is purposeful and very well thought through. So yeah, when we put in clips like that, or even when we're writing articles and we drop in sort of like a pop culture reference, it is intended to get people to think about sort of like the bigger picture, other aspects of their lives than just this one article or one video that they're watching. And it's really fun also. There will be messages going around the team being like, hey, can anybody think of a movie that has, a scene that represents, a girl standing up to like a patriarch or something like that. Yeah. So it's fun and very creative in that way. I mean, you asked me about creativity earlier. I would say that sort of like freedom to, think through your own ideas, pitch them and pursue them fosters that kind of creativity, as well as the collaboration between the teams.
Right. And even so, even in the text articles that are there in the on the website, I think one thing that I noticed was that reports generally tended to be shorter in length. And I asked this because the kind of writings that we do on our website, and I know it's kind of different, areas that are sort of covered more generally, but I think one thing that I see happening on our site is that longer articles sort of go out there. But and I don't exactly know what's a better way of doing that. So I really want your thoughts on that. So when reports are generally shorter and they're very concise and to the point, but also, I mean, with an article like, I'm forgetting the writer's name, but there was this article on TheSwaddle about moral tales and Aesop's fables and all of that, and do they still have relevance? That's slightly a longer piece. So what goes on behind deciding how long a particular piece should be? Is it, and what do you sort of, how do you find that balance? Because I mean, speaking from personal experience in our own magazine, I do think that sometimes the pieces, we don't really have a word limit as such, but sometimes the articles can tend to get a little longer, and then you might risk losing the reader's attention. So how do you sort of navigate through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, it is important to have a mix of length content and types of content, right? And formats. I don't know if you've seen any of we have health primers that are sort of like intended to be more educative or just like a resource you can go to, and that's different from like our sort of short news write-ups and different from our longer features. First of all, the writer of the morality tales, that was Sonia Kalyar,
Soumya
culture
Kalyar,
editor.
yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's there's no set formula. We try to have several shorter write-ups each day, and the thing with the longer write-ups is that that's our opportunity to really go in depth, whether it's produced internally or it's commissioned from an independent journalist. And so we take our time with that. We want to make sure it's really good. So there's not necessarily a set, ratio or schedule of different types. We do try to make sure in any given week we have a representative diversity of formats and links on the site. But again, day by day, I don't think there's necessarily a set formula for that. The longer ones, in general, we try to keep the longer articles between 800 to 1,000 words long, and you'll see that as on a lot of publications sites, you'll see that as sort of like a limit, a rough limit. That said, we do have several long form features on the site, and it comes down, I mean, it's a case by case basis, because there are some subjects that you can't do justice to in 800 words, and you need like 1,600. But there are other times when you write 1,600 and, your editor goes, actually, you really only needed 800 words for this. So it's case by case, and it comes down to sort of like working together and having other people who can be sounding boards for you, and working with an editor who can sort of like help you see, does this need to be longer, or can this be, can this be a little shorter? And yeah, I wish we had a formula to share with you, but I will say a diversity of sort of type of article as well as length. It's just nice for readers, right? It gives them something to choose from.
Yeah. No, I agree. And even in, say, in terms of content, so for example, is there, how do you sort of decide that what kind of a content, what kind of a theme, subject, topic, if it should be presented in more like a video format or in text? Say, for example, there was this video that I recently watched about sexuality, the whole discourse of sexuality in Ayurveda. So how do you decide that? Does that go into the video format? Does it work better there, or does it work better in text? And also, perhaps you could also, through that, speak about maybe the pros and cons of deciding and of dealing with the topic in terms of video or audio or text. Like, how do you sort of navigate through that?
So, I mean, you're assuming that our audience is the same for each of our formats. And that's not necessarily true. There are a lot of people who will only watch videos, who will never visit the website to read our articles, or people who listen to our podcasts but who have never really watched a video. So it's not such a clear, like, let's put it this way. It's not always such a clear like conversation around like, is this a video or is this editorial? A lot of times is, what else could it be, right? So if someone comes and says, I have this idea for, excuse me, an article, there's often sort of like a, what else can it be conversation. And one thing you're leaving out as well is social media, because social media is essentially its own platform and version of as much as, you know, podcasts and video and editorial are. So a lot of times, so sometimes in the morning we have conversations where we're like, and this gets back to sort of like, do we have anything to add? And it's like, sometimes it's like, no, we don't have anything to add. This is still something that's important to us that, you know, we want to cover in some way. And so then we're like, okay, well, maybe we do like a tweet or an Instagram post, or maybe we sort of, you know, the video team sort of files it away and maybe they use it in a future video or something. So it's not so much either or conversations that we have, so much as how can we like do a bunch and do it together.
Right. No, actually, that's pretty interesting, especially the point about how you could have different sorts of readers consuming different kind of content, and it's not necessarily that you'll have an overlap there. And we're also sort of interested in this particular point, and we'll probably pick it up a little bit later as well, because this is also something that we as the Hindu College Gazette have been thinking of doing, so expanding into video and audio. But I mean, before we go there, a little more about TheSwaddle and about you specifically. So how do you think has working at the TheSwaddle sort of influenced, impacted you in a personal way? I mean, I know that happens, of course, working with a publication and just with getting experiences, but that, yeah.
No, I'm just reacted that way because how much time do you have? It has affected me profoundly, personally and profoundly in a lot of ways. I would say, oh gosh, where to begin? I'll say two things, and they're kind of related. But one is working for a woman boss with a primarily woman team. We have one man on the team. It's a different experience, and it's a very empowering one, and I credit that to our editor, who has made it a very like hardworking, high expectations environment, but also one which fosters a lot of creativity, and one in which you feel your voice is heard, and that you have agency, and you have sort of like a stake in things, right? And I would say that's not necessarily true in the broader industry. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of other places. And as a journalist, I definitely feel like I blossomed, to use like a really strange term, but I feel like I blossomed there. And I like, and personally, like, it gives you, as a woman, it gives you a lot of confidence to see, to be in that kind of environment. I've been in environments where that's definitely not the case, and precisely because I was a woman. So that has personally affected me a lot in terms of, you know, confidence and just excitement about going into work. I also don't know, I had a son last year, and I also don't know that I ever would have become a parent had I not worked there. I think TheSwaddle, more than anything, gave me a view of motherhood and being a working woman that I could relate to and that felt desirable to me when everything else out there just felt like sacrificial and not like something I was interested in doing. So I don't know that if I had worked elsewhere, that would have had the same effect, and that I would have come around to the idea of having kids. And I love my kid. He's great.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting. And in fact, also another thing which came to my mind was so working in kind of a different cultural, social, political context, what you might have been familiar with since, I mean, from your own experiences, and then here working with people, I mean, Indians, and in kind of a mixed team, and at the same time covering issues which have more relevance to the realities of India. How does that affect you? Does that, what does that do to things approaching certain subjects with a kind of maybe a cultural sensitivity, or challenging any kind of biases, presuppositions, anything like that? How has that cultural dynamic influenced you?
Yeah, I think you have to be a little humble. There are certain issues that I don't necessarily trust my judgment on as much as I trust my colleagues on. Certain political issues, caste, like I just don't have the life experience and sort of cultural understanding that someone who has grown up in India and lived it and breathed it has. So you have to be willing to trust others' judgments, and which isn't to say like I don't have my own opinion, which I think is a fairly educated one, but like on certain issues like that, I will always seek out the opinions of my colleagues because I need a sounding board on those. So it makes you a little humble about stuff like that. It also and similarly, it makes you recognize your limits. Like I'm probably not going to go out and cover certain issues because I just don't have the background context and understanding to be able to do it in the right way. But at the same time, like it broadens your knowledge and broadens your understanding of the world, which is why I think I always wanted, like from the beginning of our conversation, why I always wanted to live and work overseas from the US, because I wanted that exposure. Man, my colleagues are great, like they're cool people and they have really interesting thoughts. And one of the things I hate the most about the pandemic is that we can't all be together and have the cool conversations we used to have in the office, because they always like forced me to like think more deeply about things, or exposed me to something I just wasn't exposed to before.
Right. And yeah, I mean, again, something that I think all of us can relate. And especially in terms of, say, for example, TheSwaddle is, I mean, of course, English-based, and the kind of content that it covers. Would it be right to say that your viewership and your readership generally comes from urban spaces and an English-educated population? And are there plans, or have you thought about perhaps expanding on that through maybe regional languages or some other techniques to sort of reach out to a wider audience, or sort of a more diverse audience in that sense?
Yes and yes. Yes. There are plans to explore that.
Okay. All right.
It's in the works. I can't say anything more than that.
Yeah, that's.
But yeah, that is something that we want to do, because as I mentioned earlier, being primarily English language really does limit your audience, and I think more importantly to or let's be honest, as importantly to us, not necessarily more importantly, but as importantly to us, it expands like the exposure, or sorry, like being English language limits the exposure and the discussion to just English speaking people. And, forget about readership and audience for a second, which, is definitely a consideration, don't get me wrong. But if you are sort of a value-driven media organization, that has to be important to you. And we are, and it is. It's just a matter of figuring out how and when to make that expansion. And it's in the works. We're figuring it out.
Okay,
because you want those discussions to be happening for more and more people. The discussions that you start, that you want more and more people to be talking about the kinds of things that we're covering. So.
Right. I think we'll see, I mean, where it goes, and we'll be probably very excited to see how that shapes up. And so I think I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I think there are some audience questions also to get to. So we'll just quickly wrap up this part about some, thoughts that we would want from you.
Sure.
How do you think, as a student publication, especially, which we are, and even though we are sort of we run out of one particular college, but our coverage is sort of a little more beyond that, and contributions also, but still is primarily student run.
Yeah.
How do you think, and because you have an experience as a student journalist and in your college days as well, how do you think a student publication goes on to sort of acquire legitimacy and authenticity for the work that it is doing in those student circles also, but perhaps also beyond that, and to become sort of a voice of reasonable, good quality work?
Interesting. You're asking all of the easy questions tonight, huh? So, okay, first I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You are a bi-monthly magazine.
Yeah.
Does that mean you come out twice a month or every 2 months?
Once every 2 months. Yeah.
Once every 2 months. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, I think that gives you a lot of opportunity to focus on quality. And I think you've done a good job of that so far. I mean, the articles are very thorough. And you guys cover a lot of interesting things. I think, I think it's, but at the same time, like that, it does pose a challenge, because you can't just jump on top of conversations as they're happening, right? Particularly online, conversations are ephemeral, right? Like there could be like 3 days where people only talk about some event, and then like it dies and like nobody talks about it again. But the conversations that prompt it are so integral that you feel like you have to cover it 2 months later. So that is a challenge. It is a challenge in terms of, I think to a couple of the principles that guide us at TheSwaddle are very applicable here. One is it fresh? Like, are we adding something to a conversation? Are we starting a conversation about something our readers care about? And you guys are students writing for students. You know what their interest is. You know what the issues are that they care about. So that's a major advantage. And I would say tap into that. Another one is the so what? What is the big picture? What is the context around us? It's not enough just to have a hot take on something. You want to be able to like actually, and again, this is what you're well suited to because you come out every 2 months. You want to be able to provide your readers with the context to understand an issue, an event, and place it in the larger, context of their life, of society, of, a larger issue, caste, patriarchy, religion, whatever that, politics, whatever it is. So you're well suited to that. But always sort of having that precept in mind, I think, can be a really guiding factor for you guys. If it's not already, maybe it is. And I think, I've seen you guys experiment a little bit with like diversity of coverage. You guys have done some like TV and movie reviews, I think, but with like sort of like a social lens. That's been really nice. And then you've also done sort of like deep dives on issues, like socio-political issues as well. So like you've got like a nice diversity of content going. I think you've got a lot that works in your favor. And yeah, I think just sort of like keeping your ear to the ground, and in terms of like, yeah, being a bi-monthly publication, sort of thinking about like what else can be said, what's missing, what was missing from this conversation that we can add, and how can we further it? I think that's very critical for you guys.
Right. Yeah, so also to just, sort of shed a little more light, and yeah, you pointed all those things out pretty well, the things that we do. And right now we're not really in a stage that we could do some original reportage, which is something that we would have liked to do, especially in terms of student news. But of course, that's not really possible right now. So our main focus had been on opinion and analysis, commentary, etc. on, a range of different issues. And I think that's sort of the path that we wanted. We didn't really want to restrict ourselves to one particular kind of a beat. And so I think that has sort of out for us till now, but also in terms of the expansion that I was talking about. And this is something that we have been discussing for months, but I mean, haven't really been able to put it into place. Say expanding on something like YouTube or a podcast, anything like that, or even social media infographics or something like that. What are some of the things that we could probably keep in mind if we are to go down that, diversify our content?
Okay, so first of all, is the social media team on this call? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, your social media presence, at least Instagram, is like A+. I love it. So like you guys are killing it there. But I think so one of the things, as you're considering these other formats, podcasts, videos, social media campaigns around like a certain topic or what have you that doesn't necessarily make it to the magazine. An easy way to start is thinking, as I said before, is thinking about how can you adapt something you already have into a different format. Is there, for instance, like a long form issue piece that could make a really cool video that you spin it off into a video script? Another option is there a body of content around an issue that you have, like from different perspectives, that you could then turn into like a sort of limited podcast series? So the content, or is there, are there different ways to, can you create like 5 different social media posts around a piece of content instead of just one? So there are different ways to start with what you have and build from there. That is an easier on-ramp than just like trying to create something brand new. Like, let's make a podcast. Okay, about what? Like it's an overwhelming place to start. And it also typically requires a lot more investment of like thought and resources. Whereas if, you can think about taking what you already have and just adapting it for a new audience. And that's where, if you think about all of these different formats, including social media, really is almost different platforms. They're all you, but they're all different platforms with their own readership. So it's not necessarily being redundant or echoing yourself. It's just reaching new people in a different way. So that, as you start experimenting and thinking about that, that's an easy way to start.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, resources is something. No, yeah, it is. Yes, because that's, I think, the key thing. How do you get off that platform, and then perhaps you can start building on that. I think resources would be to consider, because right now we don't really get any ads or anything like that. We just have a society budget which we use for, and that only for Instagram promotions. But
I get it. But I will say, if you're thinking about if resources and budgets are constrained, podcasts are typically less less strain on resource than videos. So
right.
And you've already got a social media presence going, so that's already up and running as well.
Yeah. And also, if you could maybe just spare 2 minutes to talk about something like, if we say want to monetize or something like that, what could be a possible avenue for that? Subscription, ads, whatever.
Yeah. It's tough. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's tough. I think subscription really depends on what you want to be. Subscription does limit your readership. It puts a financial barrier on it, which means only people who are either willing or able to pay will ever have that information. So I'm not saying don't do it. There are definitely reasons to do it, very valid ones, and it does fit for some publications, but that is something you probably want to consider before pursuing that. One thing, you guys, for instance, your social media presence is strong. You probably have a good chance of sort of seeking out, I would say, think about who your readership appeals to in terms of advertisers, and then maybe approach them and try to figure out with a issue campaign that fits both them and you. and that way you're sort of staying true to who you are, but you're helping them reach the audience that they want to reach. And you're doing it in a way that, adds to a conversation as opposed to just being like, buy this. So that's one. Another way is this sort of sponsored reporting route, which might be a little more difficult for you guys because I know, it's not, I don't know if you have the resources to do that, but it's sort of similar to what I was talking about with the social media campaigns, is that, you have an audience of students, and everybody wants to get in the face of students with their advertising money. So you have this audience, and this is an issue they care about, and they will care about the sponsoring brand if they see that the brand cares about that issue too. So that's another way that you could do it. And maybe it's not like an article, maybe it's a podcast series, like, limited podcast series, and say, hey, we want to do a podcast on this. Our readers will like your brand if you also care about this issue. Do you want to sponsor it? And I think it comes down to like knowing what you have to offer and being secure in that. And you guys do have a lot to offer. You have a really strong audience. You have a very clear audience, a very clearly defined audience. You have an audience that advertisers want to reach, and you guys represent quality. Like, you guys do quality work, so all of that is in your favor.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's a lot to think about for sure. I think, yeah, we'll probably be having society meetings discussing this. So thanks a lot for that.
I hope it's helpful.
No, it is. It really is. It really is.
If you figure it out, please let me know as well.
Yeah. Okay, for sure. I think let's just move to the audience questions because we have quite a few, but and
Sure.
we don't really want to keep you waiting for a long time as well. You talked about digital literacy. Someone has asked what comprises digital literacy. So maybe just a couple of words on what that is and how that could be increased, how that could be integrated into curriculum, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot of so basically, what is digital literacy? I think it's the ability to use the internet, and specifically digital media on the internet, with a critical lens. So I think a lot of people right now, you could even do like a mock-up of a news website and it wouldn't be true. But if it looked legit, people just buy into it because they think, oh, this must be true. And it's there is a website called Nature News, which is all like health misinformation, anti-vaxxing information, like the last place you want to go for reliable news. But I have had some really intelligent people send me links from that site being like, is this true? Oh my God. And the thing is, I think what digital literacy boils down to is knowing that if something appears too good to be true, or to just like soundly reinforce your worldview, that it probably is too good to be true, and it probably, if it's something that you just think is like the absolute truth about the world, chances are nothing is so black and white, and knowing you need to stop and think twice about that and maybe seek out more information. How it can be included in school curriculums, there are a lot of models out there. I'm not an expert, but they do exist. And I'm trying to think, I can't remember the name of the website. I can follow up with you, Pratik, if you would like, but there are a lot of websites promoting it. There are also a lot of curriculum models out there that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I have written down somewhere. And it basically involves, like, I think, not just having kids navigate the internet and learning to use it, but also talking about where they got it from and looking at sort of like the background information behind a publication or a website to see if it's legit, and talking through that process of evaluation.
Right. Okay. The next question is, do memes impact politics in any way? I mean, it's quite short, but I mean, whatever you sort of make sense of it, memes, satire, cartoon,
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they do. I wouldn't say every meme. There are, I don't think the cat memes do. Maybe, unfortunately. But yeah, I think let's put it this way. I think they can. I think memes, if they follow the grand tradition of, political cartoons, that sort of make you, that skewer a subject or make you think differently about a subject. I think they definitely can. I think that's, and in fact, I think that can be like, they, I wouldn't say memes in general, but political memes, I think, are, this generation's version of political cartoons.
Is that something that the SWAT or something that you would want to do? Anything like that?
I can't really say a blanket yes or no. I don't think we would ever rule anything out. I don't think, but I can also say that's not a format that we're exploring currently.
Right.
But I don't know that we never would.
Fair enough. There's this one question which mentions a particular name also, and I mean, and a particular incident. I mean, you could choose not to talk about that specific one and talk more generally, but it says, what do you think about, yeah, I mean, it says, what do you think about liberal cannibalism? For example, the resignation of Barry Weiss from NYT. Do you think liberals have become illiberal?
Interesting. Liberal cannibalism. I will say, I think, I think it is a lot easier for people, and I don't even necessarily think it's just liberals, to tear down each other and fight within their group than to unite for a larger issue. And that saddens me. I think keeping sort of that big picture in mind and recognizing that liberal is a very wide canvas, and that sort of like far left views are just as valid as centrist, left of center views, and being able to work together toward a common goal. I think that's critical. That's the only way that change occurs. And I think that in this current climate, the sort of left and right around the center has been dismissed for not taking a stand, not being, liberal enough or conservative enough, for not being true to their cause and their ideology. But the thing about centrists and moderates is that they're the ones who get things done because they're the ones who can make compromises. And I think it is sad that both sides have forgotten that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. That's food for thought actually. There's this other question which says, do you think sometimes the maximalist anti-government stance of some media houses like The Wire or Caravan lead to reduction of their credibility? Should criticism of government always come at the cost of ignoring the good stuff?
Interesting. No, I'm not going to say that. So, I mean, this is a conversation that we've had as well. That, are we criticizing this just to criticize, or are we criticizing this because there's actually better alternatives? And the reasons behind whatever decision was made aren't good enough. I think there's a place for both. And I think that those conversations in both types of media houses are very important to have. I think there also is the question, though, of, are the good things proportional to the bad things? not just necessarily in number, but in terms of impact. And I think that can often guide editorial decisions in these media houses. So it's not clear cut. I wish it were.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this next one is also kind of related to sort of in this vein, which says, does the SWADL's ideological stance on most issues factor into what you consider ethical reporting?
Oh, that's interesting. Sorry, you gotta give me a second. This one.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I think this relates to the first question. And the answer is yes and no. I think our ethics are informed by our ideological stance and vice versa, but we constantly have discussions where we try to see the other side, if only to address the, the arguments against whatever argument our article is making. And that is a critical thing for a journalist, to be able to see the other side. You may not agree with it. You may decide at the end of the day, you don't need to give it a platform. But you have to be able to recognize it, and you have to be able to be willing to dig a little deeper and say, okay, maybe I don't understand, or maybe I don't agree with it, and maybe I don't think it's a valid stance, but are the reasons people might believe this valid? And a lot of times the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the answer is those reasons for what they believe aren't so different from the reasons for what you believe. And that is sort of critical in keeping you from veering off into propaganda. And I don't know that answers specifically about the SWADL, but that is these are conversations that we have every day. And yes, we do try to see the other side, as much as our ideology guides our ethics. Our ethics also make us try to consider the other side.
Right. There's another question about SWADL, which is, do you welcome ideas from students, or is this restricted only to people working in the SWADL? I mean, I guess pitches or submissions, anything like that.
Yeah. You can pitch us. There's pitch information on our website in the About Us section. So yeah, I mean, like we have and like throughout the history, we've had a wide range of writers with different levels of experience. So I would say that, our conversations are more about the pitch than it is necessarily the person, whether they're a student or not. If it's a well thought through pitch, it's always great to have writing samples. But I would say we're more concerned about is the pitch good? Is it within our scope? Is it like structured? Is it well thought through? Like those are the things that matter more to us than whether or not you're a student.
Right. There's another one which there is some, I think, context to it, but I think it basically just says, like your channel about how it traces historicity of modern day practices, and I like to think Gen Z is more open to those ideas, but like the older generation is sort of hardwired to dismiss them, be it issues on gender stereotypes, on conversation of women-centric issues. And the question then is, how would you say, do we make older generations more willing to at least look at the other side instead of just making it out to be a case of Western import or loss of sanskar?
It takes time and patience, first of all. And the acceptance that you're probably not going to convince them fully, but maybe you can move the needle a little bit. It's actually interesting. I wrote an article on this a couple of years ago about like how to have conversations with people like who have diametrically opposing views than you do, and how to sort of like nudge them towards your way of thinking. If I remember correctly, and there's been a lot of research on this, that like citing facts and figures and like using logic and rationale don't sway people. The trick is to sort of get them to think about something meaningful in their life and how that issue might have played out there. I don't know, whoever asked the question can follow up with me later. I'll send you the article because I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it. But I don't know, like, I think every generation has asked this. And I don't think anyone's hit on the answer yet. I think it's just a matter of being patient and sticking to, like, keeping at it. Like, don't doubt yourself. But you also have to appreciate where they're coming from and try to work around that. And just keep trying to be heard and keep trying to, really consider their like life view and their experience in the world and trying to like fit it within their context of understanding.
Right.
Good luck.
Yeah. There's another question on digital media and fake news, but I think we've largely covered that. So there's this other one. I think that's the last audience question. I'm personally not aware of this particular instance, so you could also probably shed some light on that. What is your perspective on Australia's news media bargaining code and about Tim Berners-Lee's argument that ability of web users to link to other sites is quote unquote fundamental to the web?
Oh my God, you guys have a higher opinion of like my grasp of world news than I actually have. I am not familiar with this. I think this gets down to sort of like digital freedom and internet freedom. And this gets back to like, I think it was, God, many years ago now, but when Facebook tried to come into India and they were like, oh, we're going to give India or internet to the masses, but only through Facebook. It gets down to, like the internet is so like unregulated right now. It's crazy compared to like more traditional forms of media and how quickly those were regulated by governments. And there's a lot of opportunity there and amazingness there, but there's also, like a lot of risk for abuse and misinformation and what have you. I will say at the end of the day, though, I come down on the side of like a free and open access web and yes, like there have to be links that people can follow. We can't limit people's access on the internet. We can only hope to educate them to, think critically and access the best information possible for them, but we cannot limit them.
Right. I think that does with our audience questions, but I just have one more question to ask you before we let you go, which is, okay. You told us that since moving to India in 2010, you have been recognized as Deepika Padukone by a mistaken phone number.
Yes.
What is that? I mean, could you tell us the story?
So in 2010, when I moved here, I, set up my mobile phone and I've had the same number since. And I don't know what it is, but I keep getting, like for 10 years now, I will periodically get phone calls for Deepika, or I'll get text messages for her. And I don't know why. I think it's just, I've like searched my own number on the internet to see like how it's being proliferated. But there was one guy named Ajay who used to text me like every night for a year, addressed to Deepika ma'am, and telling me how great my hair looked. And so, I gotta say, I really enjoy it. But yeah, that's the story there. It's a quirk of fate. Somehow, someone somewhere has like associated my number with her, and I think it's just been passed around by people. And I keep getting these phone calls and text messages for her.
That's hilarious.
Okay,
well, yeah.
Before we end the session, one of our society members actually has a question which he wishes to ask. He's been eagerly waiting. So, Shaurya, you can.
Shaurya, please.
And yeah.
Okay, hi. Good evening, ma'am. Good
evening.
Pratik. Sorry, I think I've been a little too restless to get in on the conversation. I had my hand raised from the start, but I didn't
You
write the
did.
question here. Right. Thank you for allowing me to ask. I actually had a couple of questions, but you could answer like whatever the time permits. Firstly, was regarding like I have also seen that in the past few years, because as we come through high school, that the long form media has come into play, and as you talked about the digital media is also coming in. I primarily don't get my news from newspapers anymore. So my question was regarding regulation, because a lot of these things, at least in the US, to the degree that I am aware, platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter will not qualify as publisher platforms. Sorry, will not qualify as publishers according to some of the laws that are there, and only qualify as platforms. So, what are your opinions on censorship and regulation? And do you think it should be largely left to forces of demand and supply? That if people like what they're seeing and they should have more of it, or should overall authority coming in like YouTube has started doing recently?
Um, I am very much on the side of freedom of speech and less regulation when it comes to limits on that. That said, I mean, I recognize the danger that is inherent in that, particularly on the web. And I think that means that governments and NGOs and civil organizations need to focus on, again, digital literacy to make sure that people are educated consumers of the content that reaches them. But I am not in favor of limits on freedom of the speech on the web or elsewhere.
Right now. But the if I could just push this further a little bit, is that in the previous presidency, under Donald Trump in the US at least, we saw that a lot of, and this has been a widespread view. I'm not sure how objectively true it is or not, but the big media tech that we have, especially Twitter and YouTube, they tend to be favoring some kind of certain kind of views and demonetizing or having some restrictions from kind of views. So it's not exactly, I'm not sure, at least in the US in the past 4 or 5 years, what the role of the government was. Like it's the big media tech who's taking a more benevolent approach, as one might call it, in seeing
I
and
see.
in that.
Okay, I'm sorry you're breaking up a little bit, but I think what you're getting at is that how these big tech platforms are now becoming the arbiters of freedom of speech as opposed to governments. Yeah, it scares me. I don't necessarily trust Mark Zuckerberg to have the best interests of the world at heart when he makes those decisions. I think there needs to be a lot more regulation on big tech. And one thing I'm watching with interest is the in Australia. I don't know if they've reached a decision yet or not, but there's been a lot of discussion around how Facebook and social media platforms like it need to pay publishers for their to feature their content, as opposed to requiring publishers to pay Facebook and other or social media platforms to simply get their media content out there. I think that is sort of one way of sort of taking back the power from big tech, at least for publishers, but I don't think it actually addresses the heart of the problem, which is what news people have access to, because that still puts big tech in the position of deciding, right? They would ultimately decide who they pay to feature their content, and therefore what content and news reaches their users. So yes, I think that's an issue. It kind of keeps me up at night some nights, and I think there needs to be a lot more regulation. But I don't know what the solution is there.
Okay, I think.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Nope. Good question.
And I think that's yeah. I can see the sun has set behind you, so it's
Yes.
yeah, and it's been great for us, and I think all of us had some very interesting insights that we got from this conversation. We hope you also had fun interacting with
I had a blast. You guys asked some
yes.
really good questions that made me think.
No, it was great, and I think, is there anything else that you would like to say? Anything at all?
No, just I don't know, just keep up the good work. Like, the world needs, now more than ever, the world needs committed journalists, journalists who think deeply and critically. And it's very easy to get jaded about the current state of affairs, particularly amid pandemics and lockdowns. But I swear to you guys, it's not so bad. It'll get better. And you guys can be critical in making it get better. So just hang in there.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me.
No, thank you for sparing quite a lot of time for us. It's been a blast, and thank you so much. And yeah, I think have a good day, and thank you.
Thank you. Best of luck to all of you.
Yeah,
Thank you so
bye.
much, ma'am. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.